Hello, Salt Strong Nation. Joe Simons, like Diamonds, back again, talking about inshore fishing 101, how to go up there and just catch fish. Going back to some of the basics. This is not like tying knots basic, but then again, we're going to talk about some basics because I think so many people get so excited about going to catch an inshore slam, and we talk about it a lot. So part of it's probably our fault, right? And we talk about some of these advanced tactics on how to rig power prawns now and some shrimp and some things that we didn't do day one, right? Because let's face it, for most of us, especially as we're starting out, the whole goal is to get tight lines. Now, in catfish don't count, pufferfish don't count, but the whole goal is to go out there and at least, let's just say, get on a bunch of trout, right? How cool would it be to go catch 48 trout in a spot, right? How cool would it be to go out there and catch your first snook or be with your son or daughter or wife, husband, whatever it is, and catch, a first snook? It doesn't have to be big. All right. I mean, we all got that first adrenaline rush, just catching fish or catching a couple little redfish or 20 redfish. And the beauty of it is you don't have to have a boat. You don't have to have fancy anything. You don't have to have, a $300 reel. You don't have to have all the stuff that a lot of us probably think we have to. And this all kind of happened, right, Luke, because of one of our members here recently. And not to pick on him because he is not alone at all. This happens over and over and over again. I mean, it's a big reason a lot of people come into the Salt Strong Insider Club is they're just frustrated. Like, man, I got all this stuff. I bought a boat. I spent all this money and I'm not going out and catching fish. What am I doing wrong? And so much of it goes back to what we're going to share in this podcast, because this is what builds confidence. This is what gets you the ability to start picking out better spots, right? This is what gets you one step closer to the 90-10 zone every time you go fishing, where at some point it becomes kind of intuitive that, hey, you know what? In the wintertime, I'm not going to fish right here. And in the summertime or spring, I'm not going to fish here because I know this stuff because I've been watching the trends and watching the reports and in the community. So long story short, we're going to break it down in just in simplest form possible on how to go out there and just get tight lines. Even if you don't have a boat, even if you don't have power poles and all the trolling motors and the fancy stuff out there, if you have it, great. You're going to have a little bit of an advantage. But then again, you don't have to have this stuff. So Luke, where do we begin?
That was a long intro, very long intro.
And you're welcome.
Yeah. So basically what we're going to do is this is the how to never get skunked game plan. And it's all about keeping it simple and following just a very simple and easy to replicate strategy. And we'll give a strategy for like the open bays with like grassy areas, as well as marsh systems. So where there's a lot of creeks and marshes, because it's kind of the same thing, but you have to do two different things. They're unique, two different unique things. But it's really about keeping it simple. So the problem that Joe mentioned with one of our new members that he was doing, and just please don't do this, is what he was doing is he was getting a tip from here, and then a tip from over here, and then a tip from way over here. And all of them were different strategies for different things.
Yes.
And he's getting confused. So we ended up having every lure possible, right? Way too many. He got way too big of a rod and reel set up. His line was too strong because he got a tip from a guide that you should use this rod and this line for different species and different environments. So long story short, it's much better to have one recipe and follow it than to get bits and pieces of 20 different recipes. And now you're totally confused. In most cases, you go backwards and you're super frustrated. Right. I think we all been there.
Yeah. And so let me give you an example, because we met this member at the boat ramp. So we're fishing the same spot he was, and we had a pretty epic day, and he caught nothing. And one of the first things that Luke saw was, guys like Peter Deeks, let's just say, because this is a tip he got from guides, right? There's guides that are going after big trophy fish, right? And there's guides that use 20-pound braid on their line. There's their main line. They're using 20-pound braid. They're going after monster fish. Maybe they're going tarpon fishing, right? Or cobia. And so he sees that, well, hey, the guides here in the area have 20-pound braid, so I'm going to use that as well. And we're fished on grass flats. There's nothing remotely even close to why you would need 20-pound braid. And it seems so slight. And he was like, well, man, what if I get into a big fish? Well, hey, let's try not to get skunked first, right? Let's try to at least catch some fish. And having the ability to cast that much further when you're on the flats and you're in 3 feet of water, there is zero reason that you would need 20-pound braid. And that was just one example of many that we all fall in that trap. We did, right? Remember, we used to only go out there with 4,000 series reels that we'd spent $230. We get the nicest Shimano reels possible, CI4s. and spooled up with 20-pound braid. We didn't need any of that stuff. And when we started simplifying it, things got better. We started catching more fish. The confidence level went sky high. So that was just one example.
And before that, before we got our 4,000 spinning reels, we were using bait casting tackle, like the bait piston tackle that we were using for throwing big heavy jigs for snook and inlets, which is really how we first got into saltwater fishing. And we were trying to apply that in the flats and just failed miserably for many years, like literally many years before.
I'm sure there was people going by laughing at us back in the day.
Yeah, I mean, it was terrible. So I feel your pain. And so this podcast is just to cure that pain and not to get in that situation, and to do it with the simplest and least amount of effort possible. And so as far as the lure, this is the one lure for our show. This is the one lure that out of all the different pros that we've interviewed over the years, both for filming tips and doing podcasts, I believe, I don't know if it's at least 95% of them have mentioned this lure as being the go-to. If they could only have one lure for inshore saltwater fishing, it's it. I can't think of any that didn't say it.
I don't know what the answer is. So,
yeah.
No.
Right. Well, the answer is just a small paddle tail, right? Just a paddle tail.
Yeah.
A soft plastic paddle tail on a jig head. This is shockingly effective. And whether you're going after snook, redfish, sea trout, flounder, like even some big ones, I've got some of my best fish on this lure in particular, but it also works great for everything. Like I've caught cobia with it, obviously a lot of Spanish mackerel, ladyfish, jacks. Really everything eats it. Everything that will eat a small bait fish will eat a little 3 to 4 inch paddle tail on jig head. So what I recommend anybody do, if you're new to fishing, if you're going out and getting skunked, is just to use this and only use it. Don't switch, right? Go to different spots. This lure is going to work. If you're not catching fish, it's not the lure. It's you're almost undoubtedly in a bad spot,
yes,
or in a good spot at the right time, at the wrong time. So the idea is just to master one lure, right? That is always the key. And over time and over a short time, in most cases, we'll talk about the where to fish next. But in most cases, what you'll find is you'll actually be catching more fish per hour of fishing if you just focus on this one lure and go to the type of spots that we're going to talk about than you would if you had, say, like live bait and went through all the time and effort to get live bait. Obviously, if you're in a good spot and you know where the fish are, the live bait is going to help you catch more. But the advantage of this lure is that you can fish it fast, you can fish it slow, you can cover a lot of water, and that's just going to increase the odds that you get onto some feeding fish. If you're new to an area or new to fishing altogether, it's going to enable you to cover a lot of water, and it's going to significantly increase the odds that you come across a good feeding zone.
Yep. And we go down to Boca Grande quite a bit. Our parents have a condo in Placida, not too far away. And I'm going there next week. And guess what I'll be doing with my kids? A lot of times we'll actually pull up one of those little sandbars and find a little point with some moving water and let my kids cast out. That Luke's holding, if you're watching, it's a 3.5 inch paddle tail. That's our Slam Shady 2.0 on a 1/4 ounce jig head, and let them just get a little light spinning tackle and let them cast that thing out and just straight retrieve. I mean, we have tons of videos of my little daughter when she's 6 and 7 years old, just doing that. I mean, she could barely even cast the thing. And yet she's still just straight retrieving and catching little trout. She's not catching record fish, but she's catching fish. She's getting tight lines, which is the whole point of this. So Luke, let's go from that lure, this 3.5 inch Slam Shady, and you can use whatever you want to. We obviously like Slam Shady because it's simple and it's proven, and we're still trying to hit 100 species. We're like 92 or something. Let's go from the lure all the way to the butt of the rod, meaning let's talk about what knot do you use? How long is the leader? Let's literally just cover everything you need on the tackle side. And then we're going to move into the types of spots that you can use from Texas to Florida to Virginia and everywhere in between to go out there this next weekend, whatever, we're going tomorrow, whatever it is, and actually get tight lines.
All right. So number one is get a small paddle tail, right? Any like 3 to 4 inch white paddle tail will work. The Slam Shady has an advantage because it sticks out a little bit more with the silver and gold specs in there. But what you also need is a leader. And so I usually just use 20 pound, right, for doing this type of fishing, because mostly we're going to be catching trout, jacks, ladyfish, nothing with too big of teeth. If you're getting Spanish mackerel, that's when you need to beef up to 30 pound, because they obviously can chew through line a whole lot easier. but usually it's a 20-pound leader, and just mono is fine. You don't need to spend extra money in fluoro. I've switched back and forth literally for a couple of years, and I couldn't tell the difference. So now I just use mono, and all you need is about maybe 20 to 24 inches of mono. Right? It doesn't have to be perfect. Sometimes even if the fish are aggressive, you can sometimes you're busy catching them. You keep after you catch some fish, always check to make sure there's no nicks in line. And then usually when it gets down to about a foot, I'll replace it and start over again. As far as the knots, right? Any braid to leader knot will work. I use the FG knot. It's a little bit more complex than others. The double uni knot works fine. Right. So just go with what you're comfortable with. Very important is the main line. This is the line.
Can you talk about the knot on the jig head?
Not on the jig head. So loop knots, loop knot is more effective, and I use the non-slip loop knot. And the benefit of that, as you can barely see there, is that the tag end is pointed back towards the lure. So if you're in an area like Tampa Bay or Charlotte Harbor, where there's a lot of seagrass in the water, the fact that the tag is pointed back towards the lure, that's just one less thing for seagrass and other floating debris to get snagged on.
Yep. And then just go to saltshore.com, look up non-snag or cray loop knot, KR.
Non-slip loop knot is the term for
okay.
it. Some people call it cray, but
under both of them.
Yep. So that's the actual equipment you need. But what I was going with the main line, so the main braid main line, right? That's the line that's in our actual spool. This is super important. This is where we messed up for a long time. And this is where that recent member was making a mistake on, is that what you need is, first of all, go with braid, not mono. Braid, it just casts further, it's stronger, and it lasts way longer. Yes, it's more expensive, but it's maybe like 3 or 4 times more expensive than mono, but it'll last 5 or 6 times longer than mono. So after overall usage is considered, I truly believe that this braid is less expensive on a year-over-year basis. So I would say go no more than 10-pound braid. 10-pound is plenty. And with the FG knot, it is shocking how strong this stuff is. I have done a lot of knot contests and experiments on different knots. And like with the FG knot, this usually breaks at around, say, 20 pounds, plus or minus. That's a lot of power. That's more power than you ever need for pretty much any size sea trout. And then most of the saltwater, inshore saltwater species.
My buddy Jeff just won a tournament on the east coast of Florida for inshore fishing, where they have much bigger fish in general than the Gulf Coast. And he won the whole thing. I mean, a couple $1,000. I was like, what did you do? He goes, all I did was I went down to 8-pound test on all my tackle, because it was all about catching a ton of fish. And so, this gentleman, including us for many years, we had the mindset of, well, what happens if I get that real big one? Focus on getting something first, right? Don't, and you'll be surprised, even if you do get that big one, if all your knots are good and there's not any crazy structure around, you're still going to have an amazing chance of landing it. But this is all about getting tight lines. And this dude, I mean, literally won a legit tournament by going down to 8, when most people would think, well, gosh, I could lose that catch of the day. And it was all about numbers, right? He's like, I'm going to catch as many as I can. Yeah, I might lose 1 or 2, but I'm just going to catch a ton of fish. And that 8-pound, to Luke's point, 20, a lot of people go, oh, I want to get 40-pound leader. That will decrease your chances of catching fish over 20 all day long. So it is a really, really big deal. And I'm hammering this because we messed up on this for so long, and it actually cost you fish.
So I've done some experiments. Just the line is so important. The line is, I used to think that I would just get whatever line was in stock or whatever. It was like an afterthought. But the line is so crucial, the main line. I did a casting experiment on 10-pound braid versus 20-pound braid. Everything else was equal. Same rod, same reel, same everything, same casting weight. In the 10-pound line, it was 20 feet of extra distance per cast. And what that equated to, it was 20%. Okay. But what that equated to in distance-wise was an extra football field of distance covered every 15 casts. Like, there's not much else you can do to guarantee you're going to be hooking up with more fish than to cover an extra football field of distance every 15 casts. That's so big. And that's why this member didn't do so well, right? Because his casts were probably, again, 20% less than they would have otherwise been. And same thing for mono. Mono doesn't cast nearly as far, especially after a little bit of use, when it starts getting that memory and gets all gnarly. So that's the equipment side is important. Obviously the rod, you need to have, with using a jig head, the cool thing about these jig heads is you don't have to have a super fancy rod, because this is an open face hook, right? The hook is exposed. So you don't need a rod with a lot of power to get that good hook set. And it's really, ideally, you just have like a 7 to 7.5 foot rod, like a medium power will do just fine. And ideally a fast action. It just helps get a little bit more distance, but either way is fine, right? As long as you have a 7.5 foot rod, that little small paddle tail with the 1/4 ounce jig head is still going to cast plenty far enough to catch some good fish. Another cool thing about this paddle tail, and this is what I do for a lot of, especially when I take out some like really young kids who are just too young to cast, or if you have multiple young kids and it's a little bit of a risky move to have, some couple little 5 and 6 year olds slinging lures around, is just to troll. Trolling up in the shallows, even in 4 feet of water, is shockingly effective. And just the same thing, right? 1/4 ounce jig head, a little paddle tail like we were talking about, and trolling over the flats can catch all sorts of fish. Even big, I've caught some mini trout over 20 inches just trolling behind the boat, and just cast it out for the kid, let them hold it, and now they actually feel the sensation of getting that strike, and they truly feel like, like it was them that caught it. So another just an easy way to do. But again, same thing. You can do this in the spots that we're going to talk about as well.
Yeah, let's hit the reel real quick. So the brand doesn't really matter that much, right? We obviously have our preference. We're massive Daiwa fans, used to be Shimano fans. Now pretty much fish almost all the Daiwa reels, and a 2,500 or a 3,000 is all you need to catch almost every type of inshore species possible. That's rare that we bring out 4,000s, right? Unless we're fishing like after really monster fish, and like I'm talking like jetties, right? Or inlets, passes, like docks where there's a ton of moving water. It's rare that you will see us. The last time I had it was we were offshore. I'm using a 4,000 dropping down 50, 60 feet. Like and a lot of people think, oh man, I have to have at least a 6,000 for that. You'd be shocked at what you can get away with especially if you have the right rod and your your knots and line are correct. But once again, this gentleman and many others, their whole thing was 4,000s, right? Slam full of brand new 20-pound braid. I mean, one, that's so expensive, and two, it's not needed. In fact, it actually hurts your chances of catching fish. And with the jig head, I mentioned it real quick, but I know some people might have questions. That's what looks like a 1/4 ounce, the Z-Man jig head, like a trout eyes jig head.
Yeah, this one is just a 1/4 ounce jig head is the one that I've been showing. But I mean, again, it's just a jig head. So I use a lot of mission fishing jig heads too. Those work great, and pretty much any of them work. The DOA Cal jig heads work fine. So just get a 1/4 ounce jig head, and that has a keeper, right? A keeper that'll hold the bait on there, and that's really all you need.
So that's it for tackle. So if you were going to coach someone personally to go out there and just catch fish, that's all they need.
Correct. Absolutely. And that includes this type of fishing plus the more advanced stuff. I mean, even the last week, I was just in that same area where that member was having trouble. I got on the school redfish, all big ones, hooked one, and then the school came up as I was fighting it. So I thought it'd be fun just to see if I can double up. And I made another cast. I put the rod and rod holder, made a cast. And so now we have two, 30 to 32 inch reds on with 10-pound braid, just light line, light tackle, everything, 20-pound leader, and end up landing both of them, where the rod holder fought one for a while as I landed the first one. And as long as the drag set properly, it's just open water. So like, they're not going to break you on anything unless there's like a crab trap or something. But the light line, that's something I never thought would be possible years ago. Right? That light, this line these days, it is just so strong where you have a tremendous advantage just going lighter versus heavier.
Great. All right, let's talk about spots.
Yeah. So most importantly, let's talk about spots. Let's see if we can share a screen just so you can see some real life examples, and we'll actually show you where we basically cut our teeth on this. And so how we got into saltwater fishing, we started going down to Marco Island.
You're not going to show my spots. I'm going there this next week. Come on, you're kidding me.
But we started going down there, down to Marco Island, and all we knew how to do at that point was just to fish and passes and just balancing jigs on the bottom, bucktails in particular. Always just been curious about trout. Like I've always wanted to catch trout and redfish and snook up in the backcountry, but we just had no idea how to do it. So this is what I'm going to show that'll significantly skyrocket your ability to just go out and catch fish, and most importantly, just to not get skunked. This is what I do. As I said before, when I take out newbies and say the bite's tough, I just do this, and it is extremely rare when there's not fish being caught. So for these open bays, all right, this is the open bay scenario. All you need to do is just find a grass flat that's near a channel. And so I'll show you one, like a grass flat that's near a channel. So right here we have the Gulf of Mexico. We have this current coming through and this big flat here. And you can zoom in, you can see some seagrass along the edges. And what that is, that's just it's basically a food source. It's a food assembly line, if you will. Whereas as the current's going in and out, doesn't matter if it's coming in or out, as long as it's moving. What's happening is that water is just bringing all sorts of bait fish through this zone. And these predators, right, whether they're ambush predators or the roamers, like ambush predators like sea trout, flounder, even snook and redfish in some cases. And then the roamers like Spanish mackerel, like ladyfish, like jacks, they'll all be here because you do have some sort of structure, right? The seagrass on the bottom is structure for the seagrass and for the flounder. And the ladyfish, the roamers, they don't really care so much about the seagrass. They just want food. And so the fact that we know there's food getting swashed around this deeper structure, now we have the ability to catch a ton of different species. And the fact that they're feeding on bait fish that's getting flushed through these channels, now that just opens up the door for everything. So that's really the premise. And so what really all you have to do, and you control the edge, just cover the edges, cover the outside edges of the grass flats. And I can't tell you how many trout, ladyfish, just everything we've caught just right here in this little zone. And even if you don't have a boat, say the current's strong or whatever, or you don't have a boat that can really hug, like follow a defined channel, even getting out in zones like this is actually one of the areas where we first started catching fish. So you can kind of zoom in here and see there's some seagrass down here, but it's all deep, so it doesn't really show up all that good on the map. But this is like 3 to 5 feet of water, and there's seagrass there with potholes. And at this time we had the family boat was a hydrosport. It was a 22 or 23 foot hydrosport, like a deep V boat, no trolling motor. And so the boat would draft like 1.5 foot of water. So we can't get up in the backcountry. But what we could do is we could just drift. We would just set up and just drift along these flats, casting paddle tails. At that point, it was those little love lures. Remember those little tandem love lures that they used to have everywhere? And we caught more trout than we could even count. It was insane. And that's really what got me addicted to saltwater fishing, is doing that trout fishing. And I even this past, I guess I was down there like 3 months ago and had my godson and some others and just wanted to get on some fish. And we did the exact same thing, right? 20 years later in the same spot, just grabbed, in this case, we were using small paddle tails, and we caught a ton of fish. It was awesome. Some was drifting, and then some young kids were on the boat. And so we just trolled to make it easy and we just had a ton of fun. And it was rare where like 5 minutes went by and somebody didn't at least have a bite. So it's just an easy way to get quick action. And you don't have to go way up into the backcountry and take some risks on shallow water. You can just go right on the edge of the channel, catch a ton of fish.
And there's similar types of spots, right? It's never about this spot, because we've done this exact same thing in St. Pete. This is Boca Grande area. We filmed it. We filmed 2 of them. If you go to our site at saltshore.com, and I think if you look up like Freedom Boat Club drifting or Freedom Boat Club trolling, we're on Freedom Boat Club boats, because people are like, well, hey, I'm having trouble just catching fish, like not getting skunked in a Freedom Boat Club or any kind of boat club membership without a trolling motor or a power pole. And so we literally went out in one of their boats, and I mean, we caught like 40 something trout in a 35-40 minute episode. And not to like brag or anything, but it was just like, man, we literally followed this exact same blueprint. We used that, ironically, the same 3.5 inch paddle tail, right? And a couple of times we'd get the tail bitten off after catching enough trout or a puffer fish, and we just start catching trout on that. And it's not that hard. And I think so many of us overcomplicate it, and especially if the pain and almost like shame is probably the right word, because we've all been there, is that, man, I'm just getting skunked and I'm like embarrassed going back home or going back to the boat ramp. Start with just catching fish. Start with just catching a bunch of trout. And who cares if people, oh man, I remember the first time I caught a trout. You see some negative, who cares? Like, this is all about having fun and catching fish, getting tight lines. It's not about catching an inshore slam or a personal best every time. It's about creating memories and having fun, especially if you got kids and other family members or, coworkers, neighbors involved. Just put them on fish. I mean, like Luke said, that's what got him excited about fishing. I mean, for me, it was my first memory was Marco Island, just catching my first snook. I was like, holy smokes, I want to do more of this. Just keep it simple for him. That was weighty. We were basically from a beach. So what else? I see you moving around. You going to show something else?
Yeah, so this is just another example, or just to show that there's not one secret in that one little area. So this is an area, this is in Dunedin, Florida. I went up here, this is my first time up here, was like maybe 2 years ago. My goal is just to explore really every major and minor little town along Florida and fish it. And so I went here, I got here in the morning, I was having a tough trip. Nothing was really working. And I just always want to make sure that I never get skunked. That's always my goal. First, I want to catch a slam, and then it's not always going to happen, obviously. And then once it starts getting around 9 o'clock or so, I was like, oh man, like I just got to get on the board. And so I always default to this plan that we just talked about, where I'll just find a flat, ideally a grass flat that's on the edge of a channel that has some good current flow and a decent amount of depth, meaning at least 3-4 feet of water, and throw a paddle tail. And that's what I did. I just went right up here and I ended up catching probably 15 trout, some of which were over 20 inches. So it ended up turning a terrible day into a really good day. And I was on a boat in this case. I was fishing this flat out here. But if you don't have a boat, no problem, right? Just find a similar situation that you can actually walk to or wade to. And so example right here, I've done this before. I fished off of this causeway. Many causeways have this exact same scenario. So there's nothing secret about this one. You don't have to drive 2 hours to go here, because there's probably one at whatever causeway is next to you. But just find a causeway that you can see some seagrass lying in the shoreline, and it's the same scenario. And that's exactly where the fish are. So get out. Ideally, I like doing the causeways at low tide. That way I can wade out and access this outer edge. The outer edge is where most of the fish will be. Although the inner edge is where a lot of the bigger fish are, like snook and redfish. Snook and redfish usually like to hang out a little bit closer to the actual shoreline, whereas the max quantity of fish is usually on the deeper, because now you open up all of the roamers, right? Mackerel, ladyfish, jacks, even tarpon, cobia can be out there as well. And as well as the structure-oriented fish, the ambush predators like the sea trout and flounders and all that. So that's really it. It's really just target the outside edges of the flats, ideally grass flats, that has the current flow and that has a decent amount of depth and just some sort of structure on the bottom. Could be seagrass, could be oysters, could be rocks, just anything other than just flat sand is really what you want to find. And you usually can see it. You can see like where the birds are diving. There's usually going to be a line, and that's usually right on the edge of the depth zone. That's where the bait fish will just naturally go. That's like the bait fish highway. And right there is where those predators are going to be. So literally just getting that one lure and just focusing on finding those bait fish highways. That's what you want to do. You don't want to be worried about, oh man, I've talked to some people, they switch lures like 15 times. They even get those little angler clips or whatever, so they can just switch lures real fast. And like, no, you're wasting your time. Like your brain, all of your brain energy needs to be on getting on a better spot. If you're not catching fish, it is very rare that it's due to a lure. The lure, especially if you're going for max quantity, like ladyfish, trout, flounder, they're not very picky. It's just if they see the lure, they're going to eat it. And so if you're just going out to catch fish, just get on the small paddle tail and focus on finding some better spots. If you're not getting action, pick up a move and go to a better spot. That's that's the one mistake that we made. We used to anchor down and sit there and wonder why we didn't catch anything or why we got skunked. And that's the best way to get skunked, is just to sit in one spot.
Yeah. And we talk about the 3 B's a lot. It's in Luke's book about redfish. It's been on multiple podcasts, but that means birds, bait, and boils. And that day, this one is so unique because this person, we literally happened to see him at the ramp. So we're literally fishing the same area. And do you recall, Luke, where we found a lot of the fish? Like we saw the birds diving, And I would say, and some of you guys could say this is corny, but I've taken it out there. Luke's seen me before, and sometimes they'll laugh at me, but guess what? It helps. Taking a pair of binoculars out instead of buying a $400 reel. Get some nice binoculars and look for birds. Like birds are like one of the easiest ways to find out where the bait is, which usually means there's some predator fish. And there's been multiple times I'll whip out little binoculars from my tackle bag and just start glancing around, and oh my gosh, there's 15 birds over here, including some pelicans diving. It's like automatic, especially if you're in the dead zone. Don't switch out your lures. Start moving. Whether you're in a kayak or boat, start moving to any area you're seeing a bunch of birds diving. It is, I mean, just a calling signal to say, hey, there's activity here in this area. Birds aren't diving on nothing. They like to reserve their energy. You will never see a bird diving in the water just for play and for the heck of it. So
and all birds diving aren't equal too. So
True.
when you see birds diving like in the middle of a bay and it's way off the shore and it's like, say it's like 12 feet deep or more, there's not going to be underwater structure. So it's not going to be nearly as good as if you see birds diving on the edge of a flat or diving even up on a flat where there's seagrass on the bottom. Because when you have that grass on the bottom, again, now you have the ambush predators plus the roamers. In those situations where the birds are diving way off in the middle of the bay, which is still good, right? We know there's bait there. You're going to have a pretty good shot at getting the roamers, but you're going to lose the ability to catch the structure fish like the sea trout, snook, and flounder, and so on and so forth. But you can go out there and catch sharks and a ton of Spanish mackerel and ladyfish, but the max fish catching is always when there's bait fish and structure on the bottom. That just open and some depth, right? At least 4 feet of water. So,
yep. All right. What any other types of spots, or you just want to say stick to that? Stick to
so that's the situation on the open flats. Let me we go back to the share screen. I'll show an example on the Marsh Systems where you say you're in an area with a lot of channels and a lot of like say like the upper northeast Florida, all the Carolinas, Georgia, is that there's just a lot of marshland and a lot of rivers. You have a lot of high current flow, and so you have very little seagrass. So that prior tip doesn't really apply nearly as much. But the same premise holds true. And instead of the outside edges of seagrass, we're basically using the Marsh system to funnel everything out into one area. And so the equivalent here is just focus on the creek mouths. So where these creeks empty into the larger bay, it creates the same situation as the edge of the channel, the edge of the flats that we just talked about. Because the edge of the flats and the open bays, that's the bait highway. That's like the highway of all the food. When you go into these Marsh systems, the highway is all these creeks. And so just to keep it simple, right? The simple, keep it stupid simple approach is to just take this same exact lure, right? Because we know anything that's eating small bait fish will hit this lure, and just to target the creek mouths. And Joe, like when we fished up in, was it just south of Jacksonville? Went up there with a member. We were having a really slow day. It was after a full moon, and just bite wasn't happening. And we went to the default plan. So we had an outgoing tide, and so all we did is we just started targeting all the little creek mouths like this, right? Either you can drift into it if you don't have a trolling motor. This is something that's easy to do. You can get a drift where you can drift into it. Ideally, you have a trolling motor where you can just go, and the points are always going to be the number one zones. And then if you can see if there's like a hole out here, right? Try to bounce it on the bottom, see if there's a hole. And then if you like this situation too is even better. You have one creek mouth here, and then 50 yards up, 100 yards up, there's another creek mouth that's emptying into the original creek. So it's all about just covering these points in all these little pockets. And that's just a good way to go to that 90-10 rule that we talk about a lot, where 90% of the feeding is in 10% of the water. And just to go out there and just catch fish, right? Just one little lure. We know a lot of bait fish flows in and out of these creeks. So just hit the creek mouths. It's best on the outgoing tide, but incoming works great too, right? Yep. So it's just the simple approach that can get everything.
And this is St. Simons, Georgia.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah. So I remember last year we were there. We actually stayed there on super fancy ritzy Sea Island. One of our friends had rented a house there, and we got invited to go. It's above my pay grade. Really nice place for all you Georgia, Sea Island, Jekyll Island people there. But anyhow, hired a guide for the day, and guess where we fished? Creek mouse. We literally hit. I mean, we literally did exactly what Luke said in a similar area right there, and caught a ton of fish. Got trout and redfish, a couple even little flounder, and that was it. We literally targeted the creek mouse the entire day. I think it's also important now. The kind of the last piece of this is tides, or any kind of flow, because that is important. Really, no matter where you are, there's a couple exceptions, obviously, where it could be more wind driven, but talk about tides if you wanted to keep it simple, because I saw that this morning in the community. Well, hey, like, I heard I should only fish incoming, or I heard I can only fish outgoing. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really matter. Incoming during different seasons, there's a slight advantage on one versus the other, and it's that we're not going to go into it because it's not worth the brain power. And we're just about finding the fish. Details on all that is on the Insider Club on the Finding Fish Mastery. It talks about the seasonality changes, but in general, all year long, just current flow. So in or out doesn't matter. Anything but slack, period, is the best time to fish. And ideally, especially this time in the fall when we're recording this, is just to get out there early. The twilight periods has been the best feed. You can, but that being said, you can still go out and catch fish in the middle of the day, particularly in this type of fishing, because like fish like Spanish mackerel and ladyfish, they have very high metabolisms. They're always swimming, and they're not shy to go up and smack a lure. So it's really about just getting the line wet. What you want to do, though, as far as positioning, is you want to position yourself so that whichever zone you're fishing is that you can cast up current and retrieve your lure with the current, at least, or across current is fine. What you really don't want to do, obviously you can do it, but it doesn't work quite as well, is to retrieve your lure against the current. So if you're casting with the current and retrieving against it, it can definitely work. It just won't work nearly as effectively as if that lure is coming with the current, because those predator fish are going to be facing into the current, assuming the current's strong. If the current's not very strong, it doesn't matter, really. Like if you can't swim against it, or if you can swim against it like effortlessly, then you can kind of do whatever you want. But if it's going strong enough where you can't swim against it, you better believe those fish are aiming into the current, and they're expecting their next meal to come towards them from the front. So the stronger the current, the more important it is to cast up current and retrieve with it. So just that's really the only big thing you need to know about as far as doing this type of fishing. And then even trolling works great. And it's a little bit better to troll with the current, right? That way your lure is now going with the current. But I've caught a good amount of fish too when like you find a good area, and then instead of going way around to then hit it again, I'll just reverse or turn quick and then just drive straight back up and troll up and catch fish too going into the current. So just try a little bit of both, see what's working near you. But just know that as the current gets stronger and stronger, it becomes more and more important to always retrieve your lure with that current.
Yep. Cool. All right. Want to reiterate the spots. I think everyone got the lure, a little 3.5 inch paddle tail, 1/4. I mean, you can have a 1/8 as well, but 1/4 ounce jig head. Just if you're going to pick one and just master it, 20-pound mono leader, about 2 feet, 20 inches, 24 inches. And I would say double uni might be easier for someone new versus the FG in terms of the knot that you're going to use from your, let's just say 20-inch mono to your 10-pound braid, and then a 2500 or 3000 series spinning reel on a 7-6 medium fast action rod. We missed the like cray loop knot, any kind of loop knot.
Non-slip loop knot is the correct term. Cray's not right, but yeah, just a loop knot.
Cray's right. It's just
of any kind of work. And as far as the lures, right? If you haven't yet done so, is these lures just flat out work. It's the Slam Shady 2.0s. And if you don't have any paddle tails, or if you'd like to try these out, we do have an offer. We do promise to have. We set some aside, and we have a free pack for every household. So if you haven't yet claimed yours, you can go to slamshady.com and claim that. All you have to do is pay the small shipping fee, but it'll be a free pack of lures. It'll be much less expensive overall than anything you can buy in the store. It's just a good way to get started, and then just go find some jig heads, and you're ready to rock. But it's as far as the type of spot to go to. If you're in these open bays where there's seagrass, just target the outer edges. It is shocking how effective this is. This is the one type of fishing you do. If you just spend an hour doing it, you should absolutely come home with at least some fish stories Because in many cases, that's where the sharks are too. So you'll be fighting a fish and a shark will come up and swipe at it. Just a lot of cool stuff. You never know what you're going to see. And one cast can be a 6-inch trout, and then the next cast is a 6-foot tarpon. Like it is amazingly fun. It's really one of the cool benefits of saltwater fishing is that you just never know what's going to be. Growing up bass fishing, that was, you get that thump and it's 99% sure it's a bass, just doesn't know what size it is. And doing this fishing where you're targeting those little food zones, those little food highways, it can be anything, absolutely anything. And it's just fun.
Yep. One last piece here. So, Luke and I created this Salt Strong Insider Club a little over 5 years ago, now almost 26,000 members. And there's a foundation, there's a piece there, and it's a couple of courses. It's now 3 courses, but there's 2 in particular. I said go through all 3, but if you just go through those 2, you are going to be like set for success. Like you will catch fish. But here's the thing, like this gentleman who had the issues and many others, we do hear from some people with 25,000 members. You're going to have some people say, oh, it didn't work. We have data. We obviously own the platform. We get to go see if they've been through it or not. So we know if you're a member, what you've been through and what you haven't. And almost 100% of the cases, including this one where this all came about, he hadn't even started any of the courses, not a single one. And so like, that's another thing. And we hammer it home because it's so important. It's the foundation of going out there and being a consistent angler. And we spent, crazy amounts of money. Now overall, well over $1 million, literally over $1 million building all this stuff out, tens and tens of thousands just on these 2 courses, right? In terms of all the videographers and all the time and the stuff we had to put into it just to get these courses. It's 20 years of know-how, of on the water experience from pros in an hour to 3 hour max. Like wouldn't you love to get 3 hours to get 20 years experience into your head? And anybody can do it. And we have full-time guides. We have some guides who are members and they go through this like, holy smokes, like this is good stuff. And so I would urge you, one, to join the Insider Club if you haven't. If you are a member and maybe obviously you wouldn't be listening to this if you weren't 100% content on your fish catching, right? Based on all the stuff you've invested in, because that's where it gets frustrating, right? And once you start investing in a lot of equipment, including boats and kayaks, and you're not catching as many fish per trip as you want, that's when it gets frustrating. And we know. So if you're listening to this, that means you're still probably not 100% content. Then go through those courses, go back to those courses if it's been a while. We have made some updates in them. They're constantly evolving as well. And that's the finding spot. So it's all about finding spots, right? If you're in a bad spot, you're not going to catch fish, no matter what lures and boat and all that stuff you have. So it's about the finding spots. The other one is that positioning and approach mastery. It's how to position your kayak, your boat, or even your waders in certain areas based on certain times of the year and tides, et cetera. It's priceless. And the other one is just Inshore Fishing 101, where we have a bunch of different pros fishing in different types of areas. And that, to me, that's incredibly powerful. But start with the other 2. That last one takes a little bit longer to go through. The first 2 are super quick and they're so powerful.
Yeah, because what they're the full recipe.
Yeah.
It's not bits and pieces of different recipes that causes confusion. It's one full recipe. Obviously, there's other ways to catch fish as well, but it's rare that there's an actual full recipe, step-by-step tactics on why and the details behind it. And if you are a member and you didn't know the answer to that question that Joe posed earlier on what's better, incoming or outgoing, which one is better in which season, that's a sign that you need to go back and go through the Finding Spots Mastery course, because that's explained there. There is actual science behind it. Granted, both of them work right throughout both years. Don't disregard. Don't be like what we did for many years, thinking that if it wasn't incoming tide, the fish weren't biting. That was literally what we thought. We would plan our trips around just the incoming tides, and we never were consistent. And looking back, we know exactly why. But yeah, those courses are incredibly important. It just lays down the foundation, and that's what you can build upon. Just to again be a consistent angler. That's what. Just that foundation alone will take you from wherever you are to intermediate, if not a super advanced angler. Just knowing those ins and outs.
Yep. And you get the recipe. Shake and bake. Woo! All right, guys, that's it. We appreciate you. Hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully this answers some questions. Hopefully this just gives you a simple blueprint, a recipe, if you will, a guide to go out there and just get tight lines, especially if you're just an inshore angler, which I assume you are if you're listening to the podcast, and you want to catch trout and redfish and flounder, all those places Luke mentioned have all of the above, plus sharks and, get occasional cobia and triple tail, all kinds of stuff that you can find out there. But I think the easiest is just focusing on trout and some even snook. The last time we were right where that guy had the issue, and we were catching snook right out there on that flat, right in the middle of nowhere. Once again, we saw the birds, like, man, there's got to be a bunch of fish around here, and we were catching everything right in that one spot.
One thing we didn't touch on, we need to talk about, is just the retrieve. So with these paddle tails, is the good news about it is you don't have to do any specific retrieve. It's not like, oh, if you're not doing this twitch pause, you're not gonna catch anything. You can just reel it in straight, right? Because trolling works great, just doing it straight. Or if the fish are a little bit lethargic, or if it's deeper, or you're covering a pothole, just literally let it fall all the way down to the bottom, and you can just kind of bounce on the bottom. That works. What's generally best is to try a little bit of everything. Do some fast, do some slower, let some go deeper, let some hang higher up in the water, and let those fish decide. Because sometimes you're going to be in a spot where it's only trout and they're right on the bottom and they won't move. Sometimes those trout are willing to come up to the surface, and you have all the mackerel and everything happening on the surface. So just experiment around. Don't get into a habit of just doing the same retrieve over and over again, because in many cases, a slight change to the retrieve will make an impact. A change in retrieve is way more impactful than a change of lures. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. And again, if you haven't yet tried these lures, slamshady.com, or I'm sure we'll put a link down below to it, but just claim your free pack. They're excellent lures. This is what I do the underwater filming with, where you can see those big trout coming up and eating it. It is shocking how, like, once a trout starts following it, I haven't yet seen one turn away. As soon as they start tracking, they come up and smack it. So it is proven to work with not only just the quantity fish, but also quality fish as well.
Yep. And if you already have claimed your free pack, we have an online store. Our members get 20% off or more at Fish Strong. So Salt Strong is where to go join the club, and then fishstrong.com is the tackle store. We keep it super simple. You got 100 packs. Luke, you need a new 100 pack there.
Yeah,
dude.
mine's this one's been through a lot. I've had this one for a while. Time to get another 100 pack.
Yeah, that's what Luke and I use personally. And you'll see in the drop down the ability to get 100 pack to save quite a bit of money. So that's at fishstrong.com. Otherwise, any questions, let us know. We put all of these podcast/fishing tips on the fishing tips section of our site. So if you're at saltstrong.com, up at the top, you'll see a little area that says fishing tips, or if you're on mobile, there'll be a little drop down, fishing tips, and look for this one at the very bottom of each post. You'll see a place you can leave us questions. It comes right to us. We'd love to help out. And thank you guys for your current insider members. You guys rock. Cannot wait to see you in the community and get some really cool things we are cooking in the kitchen. Shake and bake. Woo! All right, we out. Talk to you guys in the next episode. Peace.
Yeah.